The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that made the air thick, almost suffocating. The kind that makes you feel like you're holding your breath, waiting for something to happen. Everyone in the room, from the spectators to the lawyers, knew this was no ordinary case. This was the kind of case that would echo through the history of legal battles, with one of the most powerful men in the world at the center of it all, Elon Musk. But today, something unexpected was happening. Musk, the CEO of several world-changing companies, stood at the defense table with his back straight, eyes locked ahead, his jaw clenched in determination. He had weathered far worse storms in his life, battles with the media, investors, even the government. But none of those had prepared him for this. None of them had prepared him for this courtroom, this judge, or this moment. Judge Harper, a woman known for her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude, leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the gavel. Her cold gaze moved over the room, finally resting on Musk. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, almost as if she were savoring the moment. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. "You think you can simply walk in here and use your wealth and power to intimidate the court?" Her words rang out like an accusation, causing the room to collectively shift in discomfort. Musk didn't flinch. His eyes stayed steady, unblinking, as if he had already anticipated this moment. He had been to courtrooms before, had faced worse accusations, and had come out the other side unscathed. But this time, something felt different. This time, the stakes were higher. His empire, his reputation, everything he had worked for was on the line. "I'm not here to intimidate anyone," Musk said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "I'm here to defend myself against baseless accusations." Judge Harper chuckled, the sound sharp and biting, like a whip cracking in the air. The courtroom held its breath, unsure of what would happen next. Musk's legal team exchanged glances, a mixture of frustration and concern flickering across their faces. "Defend yourself?" Harper repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You honestly believe you can simply waltz into this court and talk your way out of a multimillion-dollar lawsuit? A lawsuit that accuses you of everything from fraud to unethical business practices?" She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. "You must think I'm an idiot, Mr. Musk." The gallery erupted into a murmur, whispers darting through the air like a storm brewing. Musk's face remained impassive, his posture still tall. He had faced far worse public scrutiny before. This was just another day at the office. Or so he thought. It wasn't just about the approval of the investors, it was about preserving what mattered most to him, the community and the sense of belonging that had always been at the heart of the restaurant. "I appreciate that, Mark," Clint said. "But this place isn't just about the food or the investors. It's about the people who come in here, night after night, and make it their own. That's what's always mattered to me." Mark regarded him silently for a moment, and then his expression softened. "I get it. And you've managed to keep that. But I'd say you've done a good job of making sure it stays profitable, too." Clint smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thanks. I think we found a way to make it work." As Mark left, Clint stood in the middle of the bustling restaurant, surrounded by the people who had helped him get here, Brianna, Leo, the staff, and the loyal customers who had stuck by him through every twist and turn. He realized that no matter how hard the journey had been, it was all worth it. The challenges, the hard choices, the endless nights, it had all led to this moment of success. But beyond the accolades and the praise, Clint understood something far more valuable. He had taken a risk, trusted his instincts, and in doing so, had preserved the very thing that made the restaurant special. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered. As the night wound down and the last customers left, Clint stood by the door, his heart swelling with gratitude. Brianna came up to him, her arms folded across her chest, a look of pride on her face. "You did it, Clint," she said softly. "You didn't just save the restaurant. You saved the heart of it." Clint smiled, his heart full. "We did it. together. And with that, he knew he had not only built a future for the restaurant, but had redefined what it meant to be successful. It wasn't just about profits or accolades, it was about holding on to the values that mattered, and creating something lasting, something that would endure for years to come. And in that moment, Clint realized that he had truly won. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the judge banged her gavel, signaling the end of the session for the day, Musk couldn't help but feel a small surge of satisfaction. This was only the beginning. And no matter how hard they tried to knock him down, he would rise again. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this case was no different. He had played by the rules his entire life, built his companies with grit, and challenged the very boundaries of innovation. Now, he was going to challenge the system itself. He glanced over at his legal team, his eyes steady. The battle had just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman, he was an idea made flesh. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, he had always been driven by something deeper than just money. As a young boy, he devoured books about space exploration, artificial intelligence, and the world's greatest inventors. He wasn't like the other kids. While they were busy playing with toys, Musk was preoccupied with the future, with questions that no one else dared to ask. His childhood was far from easy. He was bullied mercilessly in school, his awkwardness and intelligence often putting him at odds with the other students. But Elon wasn't the type to let adversity stop him. He withdrew into his books, into his dreams, and into the world of computers. At age 12, he sold his first software, a video game he created called Blaster, for $500. That moment, for Musk, was a taste of the world he wanted to build, a world where anything was possible, where innovation could change the course of humanity. At 17, Musk moved to Canada, later attending the University of Pennsylvania in the US, where he earned degrees in both physics and economics. From there, it was an inevitable rise. Zip2, X.com, PayPal, each venture was a stepping stone towards something larger, something more ambitious. And then came Tesla, SpaceX, and the bold dreams of colonizing Mars, revolutionizing transportation, and redefining energy consumption. For Musk, failure was never an option. He had seen failure up close, staring down the barrel of bankruptcy, with Tesla and SpaceX on the brink of collapse more than once. But each time, he found a way to turn it around. Through sheer determination, relentless work, and an unshakable belief in his vision, Musk had risen to become one of the wealthiest and most influential men on the planet. But the price of this success was steep. Musk's personal life had often been a casualty of his ambition. He had been married 3 times, twice to Tallulah Riley, an English actress, and once to Justine Musk, a Canadian author. He had 5 children, yet his relationships had always been strained, with the demands of his companies leaving little room for anything else. Musk had no time for the trivialities of normal life. He saw himself as a man on a mission, a man destined to change the world. His critics often labeled him arrogant, unpredictable, even reckless. But those who worked with him saw a different side. They saw a man who would sacrifice everything for his vision, who would walk through fire if it meant reaching the stars. But in the courtroom, none of that mattered. None of his past achievements, none of the lives he had touched, could protect him now. In the eyes of the law, he was just another defendant. Another man accused of wrongdoings. The court case had started as just another bump in the road for Musk. His team had been confident they could dismiss the lawsuit in a matter of weeks. After all, he had the resources and the best legal minds at his disposal. But as the trial dragged on, it became clear that this was no ordinary lawsuit. It was a battle for Musk's legacy, a test of his character and his resolve. And the stakes couldn't have been higher. Every day, Musk walked into the courthouse with a cool exterior, his face unreadable. But inside, the pressure was building. The legal team, while brilliant, was underperforming. The accusations were becoming more personal, more cutting. And Judge Harper, with her sharp tongue and disdain for Musk, was making things worse. It wasn't just the lawsuit anymore, it was the very perception of who Musk was that was at stake. He had faced down the impossible before. He had taken on entrenched industries, challenged governments, and built companies from the ground up. But now, in a room full of legal minds and sharp tongues, he felt like a stranger in a world he couldn't control. The legal system was a maze, and Musk wasn't sure how to navigate it anymore. His legal team had already started working on a strategy to discredit the plaintiffs, pointing out inconsistencies in their claims and questioning their motives. But the case wasn't just about defending his reputation, it was about attacking the people who had dared to challenge him. And Musk was no stranger to the art of the fight. He sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters, staring at the wall of patents and blueprints that symbolized his empire. The hum of machinery and the soft glow of computer screens were constant reminders of everything he had built. Yet, none of it seemed to matter now. The questions kept circling in his mind. What if he lost? What if this battle, this lawsuit, threatened everything he had worked for? Musk leaned forward in his chair, taking a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. He had to turn this case into something personal, something that couldn't be ignored. It was time to play the game on his terms. He walked into the courtroom the next day with a new sense of purpose. This time, he wasn't just going to defend himself, he was going on the offensive. The first move would be subtle, almost imperceptible. But Musk knew that, in the world of legal warfare, every detail mattered. Every word, every gesture, every strategy. He wasn't going to let Judge Harper, or anyone else for that matter, laugh at him again. The courtroom buzzed with a tension that felt almost electric. The attorneys had assembled, each one prepared to argue their case, but today was different. Today, Elon Musk wasn't simply defending himself, he was taking the offensive. Judge Harper, seated at the head of the courtroom, glanced at the clock, clearly eager to begin. She had made it no secret that she didn't care much for Musk's world-changing antics. She had seen the headlines, read the criticisms, and heard the stories. In her mind, he was just another rich entrepreneur who thought he could play by his own set of rules, not caring about the consequences for others. Musk stood beside his team, coolly surveying the room. His attorneys had briefed him on their strategy, but there was a different feeling in the air today. The usual confidence of his legal team was mixed with a subtle tension. They knew that Musk didn't play by the same rules as everyone else. He had a way of thinking that was unpredictable, bold, and often unconventional, traits that had served him well in business but could easily backfire in a legal battle. As the session began, Judge Harper wasted no time. She launched into her usual dismissive remarks, making it clear that she wasn't impressed by Musk's defense. "Mr. Musk," she said, fixing her eyes on him with an almost mocking gaze, "we've heard plenty about your companies and your supposed innovations. But here, in my courtroom, we deal with facts and evidence, not fairy tales." Musk's face remained stoic, his eyes focused intently on the judge. He knew exactly what she was trying to do, make him uncomfortable, force him to react. But he had played this game before. He wasn't about to let her get under his skin. His attorney, a sharp and experienced litigator named Ryan Smith, stood up and began outlining their defense. The allegations against Musk were serious: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and other accusations tied to his leadership at Tesla and SpaceX. It was a web of legal challenges, each one more complicated than the last. But Smith, having worked with Musk on several high-profile cases, was confident in the defense. However, Musk's mind was elsewhere. His gaze drifted to the witness stand where one of the plaintiffs was testifying. The man, a former Tesla executive named Thomas Wells, was recounting his version of events, claiming that Musk had knowingly misled investors and employees about the future of Tesla. Wells's words dripped with bitterness, his face tight with anger. It was clear that he had a personal vendetta against Musk, and that made him a dangerous adversary. Musk's eyes narrowed as he listened. He wasn't just hearing accusations, he was formulating a plan. Wells's testimony, while emotionally charged, was full of contradictions. Musk knew this, and he intended to use it to his advantage. After a few hours of back-and-forth legal arguments, Musk's moment arrived. He stood up, signaling to his legal team that he was about to make his move. The room fell silent, all eyes on him as he approached the front of the courtroom. Judge Harper raised an eyebrow, but Musk didn't wait for permission. He turned toward Wells, who was still seated in the witness box, trying to maintain his composure. "Mr. Wells," Musk began, his voice calm and controlled, "you've just made some very serious allegations. But I have something you might find interesting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of documents, handing them over to Ryan Smith, who passed them to the judge. The room was now filled with murmurs as the documents were passed around. They were filled with internal emails, financial reports, and meeting notes, some of which had never been seen by the public. Judge Harper's eyes flickered with curiosity as she skimmed the papers, and Musk allowed a small, knowing smile to creep across his face. "You see, Mr. Wells," Musk continued, "these documents show something very different from what you've testified. They show that you were a part of the decisions you now claim to oppose. You were aware of the plans for Tesla's future, and you signed off on several major projects. In fact, you were at the center of the decisions that are now being used to accuse me of misconduct." The courtroom erupted in a low murmur as the gravity of Musk's statement began to sink in. Wells's face went pale as he quickly glanced down at the documents. His earlier confidence seemed to evaporate, replaced by visible panic. "That's not true," Wells protested, his voice rising. "Those documents have been doctored. They..." Musk cut him off with a raise of his hand. "You can deny it all you want, Mr. Wells, but the evidence speaks for itself. You signed off on these decisions. You knew exactly what was going on." The judge's face grew more serious as she turned her attention to Wells, her piercing gaze fixed on him like a hawk zeroing in on its prey. "Mr. Wells," she said, her voice cold, "I suggest you tell the court the truth. These documents have been authenticated. Any attempt to mislead this court will have serious consequences." Wells opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The walls of his defense were crumbling, and he knew it. Musk had played his cards perfectly, and now it was time for the rest of the court to see the truth. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal back and forth. Musk's team had effectively turned the tide, showing that Wells's testimony was full of holes. The once confident plaintiff was now on the defensive, struggling to maintain his credibility. As the session came to a close, Judge Harper slammed down her gavel. "We will resume tomorrow," she declared, her voice unyielding. "But make no mistake, Mr. Musk. The game has only just begun." Musk stood there, his hands resting on the table in front of him, his gaze never leaving the judge. He had made his move, but he knew that this was far from over. The battle for his reputation, for everything he had worked for, was only just beginning. And if the judge thought he was going to back down, she was sorely mistaken. The courtroom was quieter than usual the next morning. There was a sense of unease in the air as people filed into their seats, still digesting the explosive moments from the previous day. Elon Musk had done something few expected, he had turned the case on its head, exposing the cracks in the plaintiff's story. The momentum was now on his side, but he knew that this was far from over. In fact, this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. As Musk sat down at the defense table, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The courtroom was buzzing with whispers, but he stayed calm, his face betraying no sign of the tension that was building in his chest. Today, he needed to follow through. He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. Judge Harper entered, her stern expression matching the somber mood in the room. She took her seat, looking over her glasses at Musk, her gaze hard. "Mr. Musk," she said, her tone sharp, "I trust you understand that your actions in the previous session are being carefully reviewed. But this courtroom will not tolerate theatrics or distractions. We will proceed with the case." Musk simply nodded, his mind already calculating his next move. He wasn't intimidated by her. He had faced far worse in his career, and this was just another challenge he would overcome. What mattered now was securing his victory, not just in this courtroom, but in the public eye as well. The world was watching, and he knew that whatever happened here would shape the future of his companies and his legacy. The plaintiff's side was next to present. Wells had been thoroughly rattled the day before, and now, his legal team was trying to salvage what they could. Their new witness was a former Tesla engineer who claimed to have been privy to secret conversations about misleading investors. The engineer, Robert Wilson, was calm and collected, unlike Wells. His testimony was detailed, and his demeanor was professional, too professional. Wilson spoke about alleged conversations between Musk and other Tesla executives, about stock price manipulation, and about promises that never materialized. His words hung in the air, slowly sinking into the minds of the jurors and the audience. It seemed like an airtight case, but Musk wasn't ready to concede. Not yet. Musk's legal team had been preparing for this moment. Smith stood up to cross-examine Wilson, and the tension in the room spiked. As Smith began his questions, Musk's mind raced. He knew this was the moment where he had to strike again, but it had to be subtle. There was no room for error. Smith's first few questions were standard, poking holes in Wilson's statements. He challenged the timing of the conversations Wilson claimed to have witnessed and pointed out inconsistencies in his story. The witness seemed flustered, but he quickly regained his composure. Musk leaned forward, watching closely. He needed something more, something definitive. Finally, after a few rounds of back and forth, Smith dropped the bombshell. "Mr. Wilson," Smith began, "I have here a series of email correspondences between you and several Tesla executives. In these emails, you outline plans for product releases and discuss company strategies in ways that contradict your testimony. You even mention stock options granted to you personally in exchange for your silence on certain matters. Care to explain?" Wilson's face drained of color. He stammered, trying to explain, but his words didn't match the emails being shown to the court. Musk's team had uncovered a series of emails that Wilson had sent, revealing his involvement in the very actions he was now accusing Musk of. This wasn't just a mistake, it was an act of self-preservation. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. It was clear that Wilson had just been caught in a lie. Musk's heart raced, but he remained calm, watching as the witness struggled to explain himself. Judge Harper, her patience thinning, leaned forward. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "it seems your testimony has been called into serious question. Would you like to revise your statements?" Wilson's eyes darted around the room, but he remained silent, his confidence now completely shattered. Musk couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. The courtroom had just witnessed something major, another crack in the plaintiff's case, another lie exposed. But Musk knew he couldn't get too comfortable. He had won a small victory, but this was far from over. The judge called for a short recess, and Musk took the opportunity to step outside the courtroom. His legal team was already gathered, and their expressions mirrored the mixed feelings in Musk's chest. Yes, they had exposed another liar, but the case wasn't over yet. There was still a long road ahead. As Musk stood in the hallway, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his friend and fellow entrepreneur, Richard Branson. "Keep fighting, Elon. The world's watching. You've got this." It was a simple message, but it brought him a small amount of comfort. He had never been one for sentimentality, but knowing that people were rooting for him, people who understood the stakes, reminded him of why he was doing this. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for his vision, for the future of humanity. Musk turned his phone off and returned to the courtroom, his mind focused. Today, he had shown the world that he wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let anyone destroy what he had built. But there was still one more thing to prove, that he could win this battle on his own terms. As he walked back into the courtroom, he felt a surge of determination. The game was on. The courtroom was now a battlefield of words, and the stakes had never been higher. After exposing Wilson's lies, Elon Musk could sense that the tide had turned in his favor, but he knew better than to assume victory too soon. The plaintiffs weren't going to let this case go without a fight. And there was one more bombshell they were waiting to drop, one that Musk wasn't prepared for. The court session resumed after a short break, and Musk could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him once more. His legal team had gathered around the defense table, whispering among themselves, analyzing every detail of the case. Musk listened intently but kept his eyes on the opposing side. He could see the tension in their posture. They had been rattled by the testimony, but they weren't giving up. If anything, they were more determined than ever to take him down. Judge Harper called the room to order and gestured for the plaintiff's side to continue. Their next witness was introduced with little fanfare, a man who had been quiet up until now, a mysterious figure named Gregory White, a former associate of Musk's. White was no ordinary witness. He had been part of Tesla's early days, a close confidant to Musk in the early stages of the company. Musk hadn't seen or heard from him in years. As White took the stand, the air in the courtroom grew thicker with uncertainty. The man was older now, wearing a sharp suit that seemed too formal for the moment. His expression was grim, and he barely made eye contact with anyone in the room. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable bitterness in his words. "Mr. Musk and I have a history," White began, his voice cold. "A history that goes back to the very beginning of Tesla. But over the years, I've come to realize that the man I once admired has become someone else entirely. Someone willing to sacrifice everything, and everyone, to get what he wants." The words hit Musk like a slap to the face. His mind immediately raced to recall any encounters with White, but nothing came to mind. The man seemed familiar, yet distant, like a shadow from his past that he'd long forgotten. Musk couldn't deny the gnawing feeling in his gut that told him something wasn't right about White's sudden appearance. White continued his testimony, describing private meetings he'd had with Musk, supposedly where Musk made reckless decisions, pushing boundaries without regard for the consequences. "I warned him," White said, his voice dripping with regret. "But he wouldn't listen. He thought he was invincible. And that's why we're here today." Musk's brow furrowed. None of this sounded like the Elon Musk he knew. This was a version of himself painted by a man he barely recognized, if he recognized him at all. White's words felt like an attack on his character, his motivations, his entire journey. Musk could almost feel the eyes of the courtroom shift, uncertain now, as they absorbed this new narrative. Ryan Smith, Musk's lead attorney, stood up to cross-examine White. He wasn't buying it. No one on Musk's team had ever heard of this man being anything more than an early Tesla investor, someone who'd walked away from the company years ago. If White had some personal vendetta, now was the time to uncover it. "Mr. White," Smith began, "you say you warned Mr. Musk about reckless decisions, but why have you remained silent for so many years? Why wait until now to come forward with these accusations?" White's eyes flickered briefly, betraying a hint of nervousness. "I waited because it wasn't my place. But seeing what Tesla has become, what Musk has become, it's clear that the damage is too great to ignore any longer. This is not just about business. It's about ethics." Smith wasn't done. "Ethics? Let's be clear, Mr. White. You walked away from Tesla years ago, and since then, you've made millions from your investments in other tech companies. What makes you think you have any moral high ground here?" White hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice growing more agitated. "You don't get it," do you? I'm not here for money or revenge. I'm here because I can no longer watch a man like him destroy everything he touches. He's used people, manipulated situations, and now he's about to do the same to all of you. He'll do whatever it takes to protect himself, and the truth doesn't matter." The room was silent. White's words seemed to linger in the air, hanging over the entire courtroom like a thick cloud. There was a sense of discomfort in the way people shifted in their seats, their eyes flicking between Musk and White. Was White telling the truth? Was Musk really the man he had portrayed? But then, something unexpected happened. The defense team came forward with their trump card, an email. Not just any email, but a chain of correspondence that proved White had been involved in key Tesla decisions, even up until his departure from the company. The emails indicated that White had been fully aware of Musk's vision, and in fact, had supported many of Musk's decisions. The story White was telling in the courtroom didn't match the reality in the emails. As the email was displayed on the screen, showing White's direct involvement with several major Tesla initiatives, the tide began to shift once more. White's credibility started to crumble as Musk's team exposed the inconsistencies in his narrative. Musk could feel the surge of energy in the courtroom as the truth began to surface. White was no longer the hero of his own story. His testimony had been undermined, and his motives were now being questioned. It was a brilliant move, and Musk's legal team had executed it flawlessly. But even as Musk watched the walls close in on White, he couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. What had prompted White to turn on him now? And what else was lurking in the shadows? This case was far from over, and Musk knew that there were more twists to come. As the judge called for another break, Musk stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. He had been through countless challenges before, but this one felt different. There were forces at play here that went beyond just business. This was a fight for his very identity, for everything he had built. And no matter how many unexpected twists came his way, he was ready for whatever came next. As the day stretched on, the courtroom grew tense. The break hadn't done much to settle the churning atmosphere. People in the room whispered amongst themselves, trying to make sense of the chaos they just witnessed. White's testimony had shaken the foundation of the case, but Musk wasn't backing down. He had weathered storms before, and this was just another hurdle to clear. But one thing was clear, things were escalating in ways Musk hadn't anticipated. It was no longer just about defending Tesla, his companies, or even his personal reputation. This was about protecting everything he believed in, every vision he had for the future of humanity. Musk's commitment to the work he did was now under direct attack, and there was nothing he valued more than that vision. The next day, the courtroom reopened, and the mood was markedly different. The tension felt palpable, as if everyone in the room was on edge, waiting for the next blow to land. Musk, however, was remarkably calm. His legal team had been up late, formulating their next move. They were playing the long game, and Musk knew that if they could remain focused, they'd be able to outmaneuver the plaintiffs at every turn. Judge Harper entered the room, and her gaze immediately found Musk. There was a subtle tension between them now, a quiet acknowledgement that things were far from straightforward. But Musk wasn't about to let her, or anyone, intimidate him. "Mr. Musk," Judge Harper began, her tone measured, "the court will hear your response to the latest allegations made by Mr. White. But let me remind you, I expect no more theatrics. This is a courtroom, not a circus." Musk met her gaze, his expression stoic. "Understood, Your Honor," he replied. Smith stood up, signaling that they were ready to proceed with their rebuttal. As Musk's lead attorney walked to the front of the courtroom, the strategy became apparent. They weren't going to just respond to White's claims, they were going to dismantle the entire narrative that had been constructed against Musk. And it all started with a bombshell. Smith's first words broke the silence, capturing the attention of every single person in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you've just heard is not the truth. The testimony from Mr. White, while carefully crafted, is a version of events that has been distorted to fit a narrative. But the facts, the hard facts, will show you something completely different. Smith pulled up a set of documents that had been carefully prepared overnight. The documents in question were emails between White and several top executives at Tesla, dating back to the years before White left the company. These emails weren't the innocuous business exchanges that one might expect. No, these emails were strategic communications, correspondence between White and Musk, outlining clear decisions about Tesla's direction and the challenges they had faced as a company. The evidence was damning. The emails revealed White's full involvement in the decisions that Musk was now being accused of making recklessly. In fact, the very strategies that White had called irresponsible in his testimony had been approved and even endorsed by him during his time at Tesla. The jury watched, captivated, as Smith highlighted each critical piece of the evidence, painting a picture that painted White not as a whistleblower but as a participant, an integral part of the same decisions he now claimed to oppose. Musk, sitting silently at the defense table, couldn't help but feel a rush of vindication. He had been in the trenches, building the company from the ground up. He knew how hard it had been to get to this point, and yet here was White, someone who had once shared in that journey, turning his back on everything they had worked for. White's demeanor shifted as the documents were presented. His face, once stern and resolute, now showed signs of discomfort. His hands, which had previously been folded neatly in his lap, began to tremble ever so slightly. The cracks in his testimony were becoming too obvious to ignore. The lies were unraveling, and Musk could feel the power of the truth beginning to tip the scale in his favor. But even as the courtroom seemed to shift in Musk's direction, he knew this wasn't over. White was a wild card, a desperate man with a motive that had yet to be fully revealed. Musk had seen this before in his career, people with their own agendas, willing to sacrifice anything to bring someone down. But White's story didn't add up, and Musk's team had just started pulling at the threads. After a long pause, Judge Harper called for a recess. Musk leaned back in his chair, breathing deeply. His legal team gathered around him, exchanging whispered words about the next steps. But Musk knew that no matter how much they had prepared, the real battle was still to come. As he stood up to stretch, he caught a glimpse of the man who had once been a close part of his journey, the man who had turned his back on him for reasons Musk couldn't fully comprehend. What was it that had driven White to this point? Was it bitterness, greed, or something more personal? Just as Musk was about to turn and leave the room for the break, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, and there was a message from one of his closest allies, the tech mogul and philanthropist, Steve Jobs' former partner, Tim Cook. "Don't let them get to you, Elon. You've been through worse. They're trying to break you, but the truth will come out. Keep going." It was a simple message, but Musk felt a surge of gratitude. He wasn't alone in this fight. He had supporters, people who believed in the work he was doing, people who knew the truth. And that truth would prevail. Musk's mind was racing as he walked out of the courtroom. The day had shifted in his favor, but there was still so much left to do. And as he took a deep breath, he knew that he couldn't afford to slow down. The world was watching, and Musk would not let them down. The air in the courtroom had grown heavier with each passing moment. The stakes were higher than ever. Musk had managed to turn the tide with the introduction of the emails, but he could feel the pressure mounting. White's betrayal, combined with his calculated testimony, had caused cracks in Musk's carefully constructed defense. He knew he couldn't afford any more distractions or surprises. He had to play his cards wisely. The break had been short, but it felt like a lifetime to Musk. The pressure, the uncertainty, the constant barrage of accusations, it was beginning to take its toll. Yet, his mind stayed sharp, focused on the endgame. As the jury filed back into the room, the moment of truth was at hand. Musk's team stood firm, prepared to finish the battle once and for all. But there was one more card that had yet to be played, a secret witness who had remained hidden in the shadows up until this point. Someone who could change everything. Judge Harper called the court back to order, and the plaintiff's attorneys looked on nervously. They had been on the offensive for so long, they hadn't expected Musk to come back so strongly. Now, they were about to face the full force of his retaliation. "Mr. Smith," Judge Harper said, addressing Musk's lead attorney, "you may continue." Smith nodded and stood, holding a large file in his hands. He approached the stand with a sense of purpose. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've seen enough of Mr. White's testimony, and we've seen enough of the damage he's attempted to cause with his lies. But I am not here to simply respond to his allegations. I am here to present the truth, in its most unvarnished form." Smith paused, allowing his words to sink in. The jury was attentive, watching him carefully. They had heard a lot over the past few days, and now they were ready for something definitive. "Today, we will hear from someone who has worked closely with Mr. Musk. Someone who has been in the trenches with him, who understands what it takes to build a company like Tesla from the ground up," Smith continued. "This person has the rare insight into both Mr. Musk's character and the nature of Tesla's decisions. Their testimony will be crucial in proving that Mr. Musk's actions have always been in the best interest of not just Tesla, but of humanity." Smith gestured toward the door. And then, in walked the witness, an unexpected, yet incredibly powerful figure. It was none other than Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX. Musk had worked with Gwynne Shotwell for years, and her presence in the courtroom was a bombshell. Her credibility in the tech and aerospace industries was unquestioned, and her testimony would carry immense weight. She wasn't just another corporate ally, she was a key figure in the success of Musk's ventures, especially SpaceX. Her words would prove that Musk's decisions, while often bold and unconventional, were always guided by a deep commitment to innovation and progress. The courtroom fell silent as Shotwell took the stand. She was calm, collected, and radiated the kind of authority that only comes with years of hard-earned experience. She didn't hesitate as she faced the jury. "I've known Elon Musk for over 2 decades, she began, her voice steady. "I've seen him through the highs and lows, the triumphs and the setbacks. And throughout it all, one thing has remained constant, his vision." Shotwell's eyes shifted briefly to Musk, who gave her a nod of encouragement. She continued, "Elon's decisions, particularly with Tesla and SpaceX, have never been made in pursuit of personal gain. They have always been about pushing humanity forward, about creating a future where we are no longer bound by the limitations of our planet. His actions may have been misunderstood, even criticized, but they were always driven by one thing, a better future." She paused, letting her words sink in. The jury was captivated now, drawn in by the sincerity and passion in Shotwell's voice. She wasn't just defending Musk, she was defending a shared dream, a vision that had been years in the making. "Mr. Musk has faced countless obstacles throughout his career," Shotwell continued, "but he has never wavered in his commitment to innovation. The risks he took, the decisions that some might call reckless, were necessary to achieve the extraordinary results we see today. Tesla didn't become a global leader in electric vehicles by playing it safe. SpaceX didn't become the first private company to send astronauts to the ISS by following the status quo. And none of this would have happened without Mr. Musk's willingness to make bold choices." There was a pause as Shotwell let the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. Musk felt a deep sense of gratitude toward her, knowing that this was the moment that could shift the entire case in his favor. The plaintiff's attorneys tried to challenge Shotwell's testimony, attempting to undermine her loyalty and questioning her objectivity. But Shotwell stood firm, undeterred by their tactics. She had seen it all before. And she knew that the truth had a way of standing the test of time. As the cross-examination ended and Shotwell exited the stand, Musk could see the change in the room. The jury's eyes were no longer filled with doubt. They had seen the proof, heard the facts, and understood the truth. Shotwell had given them everything they needed to know about the man they were judging. But as the court adjourned for the day, Musk knew the battle was not yet won. There would still be more twists, more challenges, and more obstacles to overcome. The case was far from over. However, as he left the courtroom that evening, Musk felt a quiet sense of confidence. The storm had passed, and the path ahead, though uncertain, was now clearer than ever. He had played his cards, and now all he could do was wait. But one thing was certain, he wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not ever. The courtroom was electric the next morning. After Gwynne Shotwell's powerful testimony, the entire atmosphere had shifted. The plaintiff's side was reeling, trying to regroup after the stunning display of loyalty and truth they had witnessed. Musk's team had executed the perfect counterstrike, and now it was anyone's guess how the remainder of the trial would unfold. As the proceedings began, the mood was tense. The jurors were now fully engaged, their eyes keenly focused on every move, every piece of evidence presented. Musk sat back in his chair, his hands steepled before him, his expression contemplative but unwavering. He had been here before, against overwhelming odds, fighting for everything he believed in. And now, with Shotwell's testimony, he had regained a foothold. But there was more to be done. Judge Harper called the court to order, and the plaintiff's attorneys immediately launched into their rebuttal. Their counterattack was swift, trying to tear apart Shotwell's testimony by questioning the depth of her involvement with Tesla and SpaceX, attempting to cast doubt on her credibility. They aimed to discredit her as another high-profile Musk ally who was only defending him out of loyalty and self-interest. But Shotwell was not an ordinary witness. She had seen the reality of Musk's companies firsthand, and she wasn't about to let them mischaracterize her role in his vision. As the plaintiffs made their arguments, Musk sat motionless. The storm had come and gone in a flash, but he knew that the final moments were approaching, moments that would decide everything. The verdict was close, and his heart beat faster with every passing minute. Then, just as the plaintiff's attorneys were about to finish their rebuttal, a sudden twist stunned everyone in the courtroom. A new witness had been called to the stand by Musk's team, someone no one had expected. "Your Honor," Smith said, standing confidently, "we would like to introduce one more witness. One who has played a pivotal role in the events leading up to the charges against Mr. Musk. Someone who holds critical information that could change the trajectory of this case." Judge Harper raised an eyebrow, her expression intrigued. She had already seen a whirlwind of testimony in this trial, but this was something else. Who else could possibly turn the tide? And then, as the doors opened, a familiar face appeared in the doorway, Elon Musk's trusted former chief of staff, Rebecca Johnson. The entire room went silent. Rebecca had been at Musk's side for years. She was the one who had managed his calendar, coordinated meetings, and understood the intricacies of Musk's vision better than almost anyone else. She knew the inner workings of his companies, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the impossible deadlines that Musk had set for himself and his teams. She had been in the trenches, right next to him, during some of Tesla and SpaceX's most defining moments. But in recent months, she had disappeared from public view. Her absence had been a mystery to many, including the media, who had speculated about her departure from Musk's side. Now, here she was, standing in the spotlight, her presence alone sending ripples through the room. "Ms. Johnson," Judge Harper said, her voice steady but with a hint of curiosity, "you're here to testify in support of Mr. Musk?" Rebecca nodded, her gaze sharp. "Yes, Your Honor. I have crucial information regarding the allegations against Mr. Musk, and I am prepared to provide my testimony today." With a solemn nod from the judge, Rebecca was sworn in. As she took the stand, her eyes briefly met Musk's. There was a shared understanding between them, a quiet acknowledgement of the gravity of this moment. The questioning began, and Rebecca was poised. She recounted events and decisions with an eerie clarity, backing up Musk's actions with precise detail. She was able to corroborate every key decision Musk had made, detailing how they had all been carefully thought out, with future implications in mind. But what truly shocked everyone in the courtroom was her revelation about the events leading up to the lawsuit. "I've been with Mr. Musk for many years," Rebecca began, and during that time, I've seen him face challenges that would break most people. But through it all, I've also seen him act with integrity, with a commitment to his mission to change the world. I've seen his leadership firsthand, and I know that every decision made, whether it was about Tesla, SpaceX, or even personal matters, was always driven by a larger goal. She continued, and when it comes to the allegations that Mr. Musk acted recklessly with Tesla, I know they are untrue. I've seen the private communications, the strategy meetings. I've witnessed the entire decision-making process. Every action was carefully considered. There was never a moment of impulsiveness, and certainly never anything that could be described as reckless. Rebecca paused, her next words delivering a blow to White's testimony. In fact, the person most responsible for trying to steer Tesla in a different direction was Mr. White himself. The decisions he now claims were reckless were actually part of a broader strategy to disrupt the status quo and create a sustainable future for energy. Mr. White was an active participant in those decisions, and he never once expressed any concerns at the time. The courtroom was dead silent as the weight of Rebecca's words settled in. The plaintiff's side had been attempting to paint Musk as a reckless, out-of-touch billionaire. But here was someone who had worked closely with him, someone who had seen every facet of his decisions, and she was telling a completely different story. Musk's legal team stood tall, knowing they had just made a critical move. The defense had now completely deconstructed the plaintiff's narrative. What had started as a carefully orchestrated attack on Musk's character was now unraveling in front of the jury. White, sitting in the back, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His smug expression was gone, replaced with a growing look of unease. Rebecca's testimony had exposed the cracks in his case, revealing him as not the noble whistleblower, but rather a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. The day's session ended with the court adjourned, and the tension in the room was palpable. Musk's mind was racing. He had seen a lot in his career, but this was a battle unlike any other. And yet, he felt a sense of hope that the truth was finally coming to light. The following morning's session was set to be the most pivotal in the entire trial. After Rebecca Johnson's explosive testimony, the balance of power had shifted in a way no one had anticipated. Musk's team now held the upper hand, and the plaintiffs were scrambling to regain control of the narrative. The stakes had never been higher. As the court session began, the air was thick with tension. Musk sat at the defense table, his eyes fixed ahead, the weight of the past weeks pressing on his shoulders. But for the first time since the trial began, there was a glimmer of confidence in his demeanor. Rebecca's testimony had not only supported his case but had completely shattered the credibility of the plaintiff's central witness, David White. Judge Harper called the court to order, and the defense team wasted no time in continuing their momentum. Smith stood up and addressed the jury with a determined voice. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have now heard the testimony of the plaintiffs, and we have seen the cracks in their story. We've heard their accusations, their assumptions, and their fabrications. But today, we will show you the truth. And I assure you, the truth is far different from the version you've been led to believe." He paused, looking out at the jury. Musk could feel the tension in the room as everyone waited for what was to come next. Smith's words resonated in the space, creating an atmosphere of anticipation. "We've already established that Mr. Musk's actions were guided by a vision for a better future. And we've seen that the person who claims to be the whistleblower, Mr. White, was not the noble individual he portrays himself as. Now, we will introduce a key piece of evidence that will seal the case in Mr. Musk's favor." Smith turned to Musk's team of legal experts, who began rolling out a series of documents, emails, and recorded phone calls. These weren't just mundane correspondence. They were damning pieces of evidence that revealed White's true motivations: greed, resentment, and self-interest. Musk's attorneys meticulously laid out the timeline. White had been a disgruntled employee, who had grown frustrated with the company's direction, especially when he felt his own influence within Tesla was waning. These documents, coupled with Rebecca's testimony, painted a clear picture of a man who had been pushing a personal agenda all along. One email stood out above the rest. It was a message sent from White to a third party, discussing a possible book deal about his time at Tesla. The email, written shortly after his departure from the company, included a remark about how he could paint Musk as the villain to sell more copies. This revelation, once introduced, stunned everyone in the courtroom. This email, Smith said, holding up a printout for everyone to see, shows Mr. White's true character. His motivations were never about protecting Tesla or its future. It was about self-promotion and personal gain. He saw an opportunity to exploit Mr. Musk's reputation, and he took it. The plaintiff's attorneys immediately tried to dismiss the email, calling it a personal matter. But it was clear that the jury wasn't buying their defense. This wasn't just some private correspondence, it was evidence of an orchestrated campaign to destroy Musk's reputation and undermine the company he had worked so hard to build. The courtroom grew tense, with murmurs of disbelief running through the audience. Musk could feel the tide turning in his favor, but he knew it was far from over. White had already proven himself to be an untrustworthy figure, but the plaintiffs would not back down easily. The final moments of the trial would be a battle of wits, strategy, and the full force of the law. As the day wore on, the plaintiffs tried to regroup, but their case was unraveling at an alarming rate. Each of Musk's moves seemed to dismantle their narrative piece by piece. And then, in a stunning moment, a bombshell was dropped that shook the entire courtroom to its core. A surprise witness had been called, someone who had worked closely with White during his time at Tesla and had seen firsthand the type of person he truly was. This witness was none other than Jane Matthews, a former senior engineer at Tesla, who had been at the heart of the early days of the company's most groundbreaking projects. Jane took the stand with a sense of purpose, her testimony quiet but powerful. She spoke of the challenges the team had faced, the late nights, and the sacrifices they had all made. But what truly hit home for everyone in the room was her account of White's conduct during the critical years when Tesla had to make some of its toughest decisions. David White was not a hero, Jane began, looking directly at the jury. He wasn't some martyr standing up for what was right. He was a man who constantly sought to make himself the center of attention, even at the expense of the company. He had no interest in the greater good of Tesla. All he cared about was his own image and his own agenda. Jane's words landed with a heavy thud. The jury looked stunned as she recounted specific incidents where White had attempted to undermine Musk's leadership, sabotage critical projects, and take credit for work that wasn't his own. The truth is, Jane continued, David White left Tesla because he wasn't able to accept that he wasn't the one leading the charge. He wasn't a visionary. He wasn't a revolutionary. He was someone who wanted to make himself rich off the back of a company that was changing the world. The plaintiff's attorneys scrambled to cross-examine Jane, but it was clear the damage had been done. The testimony of someone who had worked side by side with White, someone who knew him intimately, was far more powerful than anything they could have anticipated. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the day came to a close. Musk's defense had delivered blow after blow, and it was beginning to feel like a victory was within reach. But there was still one final hurdle to overcome. White had not yet taken the stand to defend himself, and Musk's team knew that the most dangerous part of the trial was still ahead. As the courtroom filled with the usual tension, Judge Harper took her seat, and the final day of testimony was set to begin. The plaintiff's attorneys, no longer brimming with confidence, were visibly tense. They knew that without White's testimony, their case was teetering on the edge of collapse. They had to rely on him now, his words would be their last hope for salvaging any chance of victory. The moment arrived. David White, once the central figure of the plaintiff's case, walked into the courtroom. His face was stern, his posture rigid, but there was something different about him now. Gone was the arrogance he had worn so confidently in earlier sessions. Instead, he seemed tense, unsure, as though he knew he was about to face a firestorm. His eyes briefly met Musk's, but there was no connection. Only cold, calculating resolve. The courtroom fell silent as White took the stand. His lawyers made sure he was properly seated and adjusted the microphone before turning to the judge. "Mr. White," Judge Harper addressed him, her voice firm. "You understand that you are now under oath. Please proceed with your testimony." White nodded but remained silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then, he began his testimony in a low, steady voice. "Your Honor, members of the jury. I was the one who blew the whistle on Elon Musk. I exposed the reckless actions, the dangerous decisions that were being made at Tesla. I've seen things that cannot be ignored. Mr. Musk is a visionary, yes, but his actions have put this company, and its employees, at great risk. He may claim to be a genius, but his obsession with progress blinded him to the consequences of his decisions." The plaintiff's attorneys were quick to pounce on his words. They nodded, clearly satisfied that White's testimony could turn the tide back in their favor. But Musk's defense team wasn't going to back down. Smith stood up, ready to cross-examine. His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of someone who knew the game was nearly over. "Mr. White, I appreciate your testimony, but I must point out that you are the very person who, for years, worked alongside Mr. Musk, witnessed his decisions firsthand, and now suddenly you find yourself criticizing him. I would like to draw your attention to some documents. These were communications you sent just before your departure from Tesla. In them, you were actively involved in critical decision-making processes, particularly regarding the company's future direction." Smith motioned for the documents to be displayed on the screen. A hushed murmur swept through the courtroom as White's words from those private communications appeared. The emails clearly showed White's involvement in several strategic decisions, ones that Musk had always been praised for. "Mr. White," Smith continued, his voice cutting through the tension, "these emails are proof that you were fully aware of the direction Tesla was taking. You weren't a passive observer. You were an active participant. Now, I'd like to ask, why did you not voice your concerns at the time? Why wait until now, after leaving the company, to claim that these decisions were reckless?" The courtroom was on edge as White squirmed under the barrage of questions. His eyes darted nervously across the room, avoiding direct contact with Musk. I didn't speak out because I believed in Tesla's mission," White stammered. "But after I left, I saw things. Things that I can't ignore. I'm just doing what's right." Smith's response was swift and sharp. "Doing what's right, or doing what serves your own interests? Because, as we've seen, you've sought to profit off your narrative. You've approached publishers, you've courted the media, and you've been strategizing on how best to paint Mr. Musk as a villain." White's face flushed with anger as Smith's words landed with brutal precision. The courtroom was alive with whispers and murmurs. Musk sat still, his eyes locked on White, an unreadable expression on his face. He knew the real story, and now the jury was beginning to see it too. Smith didn't let up. "Mr. White, you claim that Mr. Musk's decisions put the company at risk, but you've never once provided any concrete evidence to support that claim. Instead, what we've seen from you is an attempt to rewrite history and discredit a man whose work you were once so proud to be a part of." The questioning continued relentlessly, and it became clear to everyone in the room that White's testimony was rapidly losing its credibility. Musk's legal team had painted him as a bitter, disgruntled former employee who had been driven by personal vendettas rather than a genuine concern for the truth. At one point, the judge interjected, her tone more pointed than ever. "Mr. White, are you telling this court that all of these years of collaboration with Mr. Musk, your participation in key decisions, your advocacy for the company's strategy, none of that mattered to you? Why now? What's your true motive for coming forward at this stage of the trial?" White's eyes shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, he seemed lost for words. I didn't want it to come to this," he muttered, his voice weak. "But I had to stand up for what I believe is right." His words hung in the air, but the jury was no longer convinced. The once reliable whistleblower had crumbled under the pressure, exposing his true motivations. As the court session wrapped up, Musk's team felt the weight of the day's proceedings. They had done everything they could to lay bare the truth, and it had worked. The jury had witnessed the unraveling of the plaintiff's case, piece by piece. The final nail in the coffin had been driven in with White's testimony. The judge adjourned for the day, and as Musk stood, he could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. The next step, closing arguments, would be the final act of this grueling battle. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of hope. The truth had been revealed. And with it, the potential for a victory that would change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as the closing arguments approached. The courtroom was filled to the brim, spectators standing at the edges, all eager to witness the final round in this monumental battle. The entire case had come down to this, one last chance for both sides to sway the jury. The truth had been presented, and now it was time for the jury to decide whether to believe the narrative they had been given or accept the reality of what had unfolded over the past few weeks. Elon Musk sat at the defense table, his posture slightly more relaxed than it had been in the days before. The weight of the trial was still present, but there was a spark of optimism within him. He could feel that the tide had turned in his favor, though he knew the final judgment would come down to the closing words. Musk's legal team, led by Smith, stood ready for their moment to deliver the knockout punch. On the other side, the plaintiff's attorneys appeared grim, their heads lowered in deep discussion as they reviewed their notes. They knew that their last chance to salvage anything from this case would require every ounce of their skill and every shred of evidence they could muster. Judge Harper called the court to order, and silence fell over the room as the final arguments began. "Mr. Smith, the floor is yours," Judge Harper said. Smith rose slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. His voice filled the courtroom as he began his closing remarks. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Smith began, his tone clear and confident, "you've heard a great deal of testimony over the past few weeks, and you've witnessed the incredible complexity of this case. But let me ask you, what is the truth? What is the story you are truly being asked to believe?" He paused, letting his words sink in. "We have shown you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the person leading this charge against Mr. Musk, David White, was never the heroic whistleblower he portrayed himself to be. Instead, he was a disgruntled former employee who sought to destroy the very company he helped build. A man motivated not by a desire to protect Tesla, but by self-interest and greed." Smith turned to the jury, making eye contact with each member, drawing them in with his steady, unwavering gaze. "We've seen the evidence, the emails, the phone calls, the private communications, all of which expose White's true motives. We've heard from Rebecca Johnson, an insider with first-hand knowledge of the operations at Tesla. Her testimony confirmed that Mr. Musk's vision was always guided by one thing, a commitment to the future of technology, to the future of humanity. But what did we hear from White? A man who sought to profit from his position at the expense of the very company he once claimed to support." Smith paused, allowing his words to resonate in the room. He then turned his attention to Musk. "Elon Musk is not perfect. No one is. But he is a visionary, a man whose ambition has driven him to create world-changing technologies. From Tesla to SpaceX, he has risked everything to push humanity forward. And yet, here we are today, facing accusations built on lies and half-truths." Smith's voice grew even more impassioned. "Mr. Musk may have made mistakes, who hasn't? But the heart of the matter is this: we are here because a former employee with a vendetta has chosen to sacrifice the truth for his own benefit. A man who, when faced with the possibility of writing a book and profiting off of his time at Tesla, chose to tear down the man who gave him a career." He turned to face the jury directly, his tone now quiet but intense. "The truth is, you have been shown the facts. You've heard the testimonies, you've seen the evidence, and you've listened to the lies. You have a choice to make, and it is simple: do you believe a man who has worked tirelessly for decades to build a better world, or do you believe the words of someone who has used their position to destroy what others have built? Smith's words hung in the air like a final plea. The jury sat in silence, absorbing every word. The weight of the case pressed down on them, but there was a sense of clarity in Smith's argument, a clear depiction of Musk as a man who was more than just a business mogul, but a visionary leader who had fought for a better future. Smith nodded at Musk, then turned back to the jury, concluding his statement with one final, forceful remark. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is before you. The truth is clear. And that truth will guide you to one conclusion: Elon Musk did not deserve to be here. He did not deserve the attacks that have been levied against him. It is time for this court to return a verdict that acknowledges the truth. With that, Smith returned to his seat. The courtroom was still. The jury exchanged glances, and the plaintiff's team, clearly shaken, prepared for their final opportunity to respond. The lead plaintiff's attorney, David Carson, rose with a grim determination. His body language was stiff, and he moved toward the podium with a sense of urgency. He knew this was it. The last chance to sway the jury, to make them believe in his client's story. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Carson began, his voice slightly strained, I know this case has been long and exhausting. You've been asked to weigh competing stories, to choose between two versions of the truth. But I want you to remember one thing: this case is not about personal vendettas. It is about the integrity of a corporation that was built on the backs of hardworking employees, people who sacrificed everything to bring the vision of Elon Musk to life. He paused, looking at the jury with a hard, piercing stare. But that vision, when driven by ambition unchecked, can become dangerous. It can put lives at risk, and it can ruin careers. And that is what we have seen here. A man who was willing to push forward at any cost, without regard for the people who made his success possible. Carson walked slowly across the room, emphasizing his points with deliberate steps. You've heard Mr. White's testimony. You've seen the damage that Mr. Musk's decisions have caused. And we ask you to consider this: is it possible that a man with such a lofty vision could be blind to the damage he's causing to those around him? Is it possible that a man driven by greed and ego has placed his company, his employees, and his reputation above everything else? Carson's voice was now rising in intensity, a final attempt to capture the jury's attention. This case is not just about Elon Musk's vision. It is about the real-world consequences of that vision, consequences that have harmed people, employees, and the company he built. We ask you to recognize the truth, the full truth, and return a verdict that holds Mr. Musk accountable. The room fell silent once again as Carson returned to his seat. As the judge called for a recess before deliberations, Musk stood. His body was tense, but there was a quiet sense of relief in his eyes. He had done everything he could to show the truth. Now, it was in the hands of the jury. The moment of judgment was fast approaching. The hours that followed the closing arguments felt like days. The courtroom was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that only precedes monumental moments. Elon Musk sat at the defense table, his gaze fixed on the jury, his expression unreadable. His legal team sat with him, their collective tension palpable as they awaited the jury's decision. David Carson and the plaintiff's team were equally on edge. Their side had made its best effort, but the momentum seemed to have shifted in Musk's favor. Even White, the central figure in their case, had faltered under cross-examination. Every member of the plaintiff's legal team could feel the weight of their last argument, the one they hoped would stick, but in the back of their minds, they couldn't help but wonder if it was enough. Judge Harper sat at her bench, calm and composed, though there was a faint glimmer of anticipation in her eyes. It wasn't lost on anyone in the room that the stakes of this case were not just personal, they were profound. This trial would set a precedent, influencing how future cases involving high-profile figures and major corporations would be handled. The jury had retired to deliberate. They were tasked with making a decision based on the evidence and the arguments presented. But as the minutes turned into hours, a sense of impatience began to rise among the spectators. The defense team had reason to feel optimistic, but the plaintiffs were still hopeful that they could sway the jury just enough to turn the tide in their favor. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the doors to the jury room opened. The jurors filed into the courtroom, their faces unreadable, and took their seats. The air in the room thickened, every eye fixed on the foreperson as she stood to deliver the verdict. Judge Harper raised her hand, signaling for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice clear and measured, "have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a woman in her late 40s with short, cropped hair, nodded. She turned to the judge. "We have, Your Honor." A hushed silence spread across the room. "Please, read the verdict," Judge Harper instructed. The foreperson stood up, holding the paper with the jury's decision. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady as she addressed the room. "In the matter of Musk versus White, we, the jury, find in favor of the defendant, Elon Musk." A collective breath was drawn in from the defense team, their faces lighting up with disbelief and relief. Musk sat up straight, his eyes briefly closing as the weight of the moment hit him. He had done it. Against all odds, against every obstacle, he had won. The plaintiff's team, however, looked stunned. Carson's face drained of color, and White's expression was a mixture of anger and disbelief. Their plan had failed. The truth, as it had come to light during the trial, had ultimately been their undoing. Furthermore, the foreperson continued, "We find that the accusations made by the plaintiffs were not substantiated by the evidence presented. The jury believes that the defendant, Elon Musk, acted within the scope of his authority and in good faith with regard to the management of Tesla." The room was still for a moment before the murmurs started. The verdict had been delivered, but its implications were far-reaching. Judge Harper nodded solemnly. "The court will adjourn for the day. Mr. Musk, you are free to go. I trust the legal teams will work out the specifics of the judgment." The plaintiff's attorneys remained seated, their heads low, defeated. White was still standing, his fists clenched at his sides. His body shook with barely contained rage, but he said nothing. The truth had crushed his narrative, and there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. As the courtroom began to empty, Musk walked toward the exit, his steps purposeful. He could feel the weight of the last few weeks lifting from his shoulders, but he knew that there would be no rest. The media would be waiting, and the world would be watching as he moved forward from this trial. The battle was over, but the war for his reputation was far from finished. The days following the verdict were a blur for Elon Musk. As the media frenzy continued to build around his victory in court, the world seemed to shift into a new phase, one where the battle had been fought, but the war for public perception was still ongoing. Everywhere he went, cameras followed, and every conversation seemed to begin with questions about the trial. Though he had won in court, Musk knew that the true challenge now lay in managing the fallout from the case. The headlines, while celebrating his courtroom success, were equally filled with speculation about the costs to his reputation. The whispers of doubt still lingered in the air. Was he really the visionary leader he portrayed himself as, or just another billionaire looking to protect his empire at all costs? Musk's mind was occupied with the aftermath of the trial. As the public's view of him teetered between admiration and criticism, he realized how much was at stake, not just for him, but for the future of his companies. Tesla, SpaceX, and the other ventures he'd poured his heart into had weathered challenges before, but this was different. The case had left a stain on his image that no legal victory could easily erase. At his office, Musk sat in front of a large window overlooking the bustling streets of Palo Alto, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the desk. His team had already begun work on damage control, arranging interviews and appearances to repair any lasting harm. But Musk knew better than anyone that reputation was fragile, it could crumble with just one misstep. "Mr. Musk," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was his PR director, Claire, entering the room with a folder in hand. She walked over to the desk, placing the folder in front of him. "I've compiled the media reactions to the verdict," she said, sitting down across from him. "The initial response has been positive, but there's a lot of commentary out there questioning your leadership and the way this trial played out. We need to act quickly to regain control of the narrative." Musk leaned forward, scanning the papers in front of him. The headlines were a mix of praise and skepticism. "Elon Musk wins legal battle, but what's the real cost?" "Tesla's visionary leader cleared of wrongdoing, yet the doubts remain." There were mentions of White's testimony, the accusations against him, and even Musk's own history with controversial statements. The balance was precarious. "I knew it wouldn't be easy," Musk muttered, running a hand through his hair. "But this is a lot more complicated than I expected." Claire nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. "We have a plan, but it's going to require some tough decisions. You can't let this trial define you. The public needs to see the Elon Musk who built Tesla, who took risks with SpaceX. Not just the defendant in a courtroom." Musk exhaled slowly, staring out the window at the sprawling campus of Tesla headquarters in the distance. The city was alive with the energy of innovation, but he knew that public opinion could be just as volatile as the stock market. People could love you one day and turn on you the next. "What do you suggest?" Musk asked, his voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "First, we need to get you in front of the cameras," Claire said. "A personal interview. Something where you can speak directly to your supporters. No more lawyer speak. People need to see you, the human side of Elon Musk. Not just the CEO or the tech mogul." Musk considered the idea. He was known for his interviews, but they were often focused on business, technology, and his companies. He had rarely opened up about personal matters or shown vulnerability in front of the public. "Fine," Musk said finally, his tone firm. "But I'll do it on my terms. I'm not going to sit there and let them turn me into some media circus. I want to address the trial, yes, but I also want to talk about the future. About the mission. I want people to remember why I do what I do." Claire smiled. "I'll set it up. I'll also work on securing a few positive stories about Tesla's progress, some product launches, new developments. We need to shift the focus back to the future." The following week, Musk found himself sitting across from a renowned journalist, the cameras rolling as he began what would be one of the most important interviews of his career. He knew the stakes were high. The world was watching, and now was his chance to take control of his narrative. The interviewer, a calm and professional woman named Julia Harris, wasted no time getting into the tough questions. "Elon," Julia began, her voice steady, "the trial that just concluded was one of the most highly publicized legal battles in recent memory. The public was divided over the case, and many questioned your role in the events surrounding it. Some believe you are a genius visionary, while others argue that your actions were reckless. How do you respond to that?" Musk leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful but direct. "First of all, I want to be clear about one thing," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've never done anything in my life that wasn't for the benefit of humanity. Tesla, SpaceX, Solar City, we built those companies because I believe in a sustainable future. I've always been driven by the idea that technology can change the world, that we can solve big problems. I've made mistakes along the way, but the vision has never wavered." Julia nodded, her eyes attentive. "But what about the accusations against you? People say you've been reckless, that your decisions have put others at risk. That you've been more focused on winning than on protecting those who work with you." Musk's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained composed. "I take full responsibility for the decisions I've made. If I've ever acted in a way that was detrimental to anyone, I apologize. But the truth is, the accusations were based on personal grievances, not facts. The trial was a distraction from the real work we're doing. Yes, it was tough, but we've come out stronger on the other side." Julia leaned in, sensing a moment of vulnerability. But do you think the public sees it that way? Do you think people will believe you, or will they continue to focus on the controversy? Musk looked at her, a mix of weariness and determination in his eyes. I've always been someone who values truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. I know people will have their opinions, but I'll continue to show up. I'll continue to push forward. Because the work I'm doing, it's bigger than any trial, any controversy. It's about changing the future. As the interview concluded, Musk felt a sense of release. The hardest part was over. He had spoken his truth, and now it was up to the public to decide. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let the fallout from a single case define him or the mission he had dedicated his life to. He had weathered the storm. And now, it was time to look forward. The media blitz that followed Elon Musk's post-trial interview was, predictably, a whirlwind. Headlines began to shift slightly, from accusatory to cautiously optimistic. Musk had weathered the storm in the court of public opinion, but that was only part of the battle. While the media had softened its tone, the scrutiny was far from over. The most important part of his journey had just begun, the rebuilding. Musk knew that a legal victory was only as valuable as the reputation it protected, and his was fragile. Though his companies continued to grow, the cracks that the trial had exposed in his image were not easily repaired. Even within the high-tech ecosystem that Musk thrived in, some began to question whether he was, in fact, the visionary they once believed him to be. But Musk had never been one to shy away from a challenge. If anything, the trial had reinforced his resolve. There was a mountain to climb, and now, with the verdict behind him, he would begin the ascent. The first step was reconnecting with his team at Tesla and SpaceX. The trial had pulled his focus away from his companies for months, and he knew that his absence hadn't gone unnoticed. His leadership was the glue that held the various moving parts together, and that was a responsibility he couldn't afford to ignore. Elon arrived at Tesla's main office on a Tuesday morning, the parking lot full of sleek, electric cars, the company's flagship vehicles that had once seemed like a dream, but now were a global standard. He was met by his trusted colleagues, including his chief operating officer, Sandra Lee, who had been overseeing operations in his stead. "Sandra, how's everything looking?" Elon asked, as they walked through the modern glass doors of Tesla's headquarters. "Things are moving in the right direction," Sandra replied, with a confident smile. "But we need your leadership back. There are a few challenges we'll need to tackle head-on, especially as we push forward with the next phase of production." Musk nodded, taking in the energy of the office. It felt like home to him. This was where it all began. He had a vision, but more importantly, he had a team who shared that vision. The storm that had rocked his reputation now seemed distant in comparison to the work they were doing. "Let's get to it," Musk said, his voice resolute. In the weeks that followed, Musk threw himself into his work with his usual intensity. The teams at both Tesla and SpaceX rallied around him, and projects that had been stalled during the trial now picked up pace. At Tesla, the development of a new electric vehicle prototype was moving forward. At SpaceX, plans for the next Mars mission were once again being reviewed with an eye toward long-term goals. Musk, however, was acutely aware that a series of technical successes wasn't enough. He needed to show the world that his vision was as strong as ever. He needed to remind the public, and the media, that his companies weren't just about technology and profit. They were about something greater, the future of humanity. To that end, Musk began making public appearances once more, but this time, the focus wasn't on his trial or his courtroom win. He spoke of SpaceX's plans to make life multiplanetary. He discussed Tesla's continued innovations in sustainable energy. And, most importantly, he talked about his unwavering belief that technological progress was the key to solving the world's biggest challenges. At an industry conference in Silicon Valley, Musk delivered a keynote speech that would serve as a turning point in his public perception. The audience, composed of tech enthusiasts, investors, and journalists, was captivated as Musk laid out a grand vision for the future. Humanity faces many challenges, Musk began, his voice steady but impassioned. But we also have unprecedented opportunities. We have the technology to create a sustainable future, to harness the power of the sun, to build a future where humanity isn't confined to one planet. I know there's a lot of skepticism out there, but we can't afford to let that stop us. The world needs leaders who will take bold steps to change it. We can do this. We must do this. The room was silent for a moment before the audience erupted into applause. Musk's words, delivered with the same intensity and focus that had built Tesla and SpaceX, had struck a chord. It wasn't just about electric cars or reusable rockets, it was about the world-changing vision that had driven Musk from the beginning. Despite the positive reception at the conference, there were still those who remained unconvinced. The media, though softer in its criticism, still pointed to the trial as a reminder of Musk's unpredictability. There was an undercurrent of skepticism in some circles, with critics questioning whether Musk could continue to lead at the same level after the personal and legal challenges he had faced. One morning, as Musk reviewed a new article titled "Elon Musk, the Rebuilder or the Risk-Taker," he was reminded that the public's opinion would always be divided. For every admirer, there was a detractor. For every person who saw him as a visionary, there was someone who saw him as a risk to be managed. Sandra Lee stopped by his office, her presence an immediate comfort in the midst of his quiet reflection. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine," Musk replied, looking up from his desk. "Just trying to find the balance between pushing forward and making sure I don't repeat the mistakes of the past." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "You're referring to the trial?" Musk nodded. "I learned a lot during that time. Some of the decisions I made, whether in my personal life or at the company, were not my best." Sandra stepped closer. "Elon, everyone makes mistakes. What matters now is how you move forward. You've got a mission, and the world is watching. But what you've built is real. Tesla, SpaceX, they're both a testament to your vision. Don't let the noise drown that out." Musk took a deep breath. "Thanks, Sandra. I needed to hear that." She smiled. "You're welcome. Now, let's go make some more history." The months passed, and though the noise from the trial never fully went away, it became less consuming. Musk had proven that his vision was far bigger than any legal battle. Tesla and SpaceX continued to push the boundaries of what was possible, and the world began to shift its focus back to the future, the very future that Musk had always envisioned. The rebuilding process wasn't just about regaining the public's trust. It was about reaffirming his commitment to his mission. And for Elon Musk, that mission had never been clearer: to change the world, one breakthrough at a time. Months after the trial, Elon Musk found himself standing on the edge of another monumental breakthrough. Tesla and SpaceX had weathered the storm, and while the media still scrutinized his every move, Musk had successfully shifted the narrative. His companies were thriving, and the innovations they were spearheading were pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But now, Musk had set his sights on something even more ambitious: creating the infrastructure for humanity's future on Mars. The idea of making life multiplanetary had long been one of Musk's primary motivations, but now it was becoming a tangible goal. SpaceX's plans for the next Mars mission were moving forward, and the next step was to build a sustainable presence on the Red Planet, an undertaking that would require an unprecedented level of cooperation, innovation, and investment. Elon sat in the conference room at SpaceX headquarters, surrounded by engineers and scientists, all deep in discussion about the next phase of the Mars colonization plan. The atmosphere was tense but excited. This wasn't just another corporate meeting. This was history in the making. "We're nearing the point where we need to decide on the first stage of colonization," Musk said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "We can't afford to make any mistakes. The first settlement on Mars will need to be self-sustaining, able to grow its own food, generate its own energy, and withstand the harsh environment. Everything we do now will lay the foundation for the future of humanity." One of the lead engineers, Dr. Amelia Grant, nodded. We've made significant progress in developing the life support systems and the renewable energy infrastructure. The biggest challenge right now is the transportation system. We need to ensure that the journey to Mars is as efficient and safe as possible. If we're going to send people there and have them stay, it's going to take more than just a rocket. Musk's eyes sparkled with determination. It's going to take innovation on a scale we've never seen before. But we've got the right team. And we've got the resources. It's time to push the limits of what we know. Time to make this dream a reality. The room buzzed with energy. This was the moment when SpaceX would leap from a private aerospace company to the key player in humanity's quest to become a multiplanetary species. Musk was laser-focused on the mission, and his leadership was evident. There was no question that they were all working towards something far greater than themselves. Later that evening, Musk took a moment to reflect. The road to this point had been paved with challenges, both personal and professional. The trial had been a reminder of the fragility of public opinion, but it had also been a catalyst for personal growth. Now, with Mars on the horizon, Musk couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Claire, his PR director, updating him on the latest media coverage. Despite the positive shifts in the public narrative, the media hadn't fully let go of its fixation on his legal battle. But Musk was no longer concerned about the opinions of others. He had bigger goals. His gaze shifted to the night sky visible through his office window. There, amidst the stars, lay the future. The future he was determined to build, not just for himself, but for all of humanity. A few weeks later, Musk stood before an assembly of investors and tech giants at the International Space Exploration Summit. The crowd was a mix of industry leaders, government officials, and venture capitalists, all eager to hear what Musk had to say about the future of space exploration. Elon's presentation was bold, unapologetic, and full of his signature style, blunt, yet inspiring. He began with a simple but powerful statement. "We are at a crossroads in human history," Musk said, his voice carrying the weight of his vision. "We have the technology to change the future of humanity, but we can't afford to wait. Mars is within reach, and it's up to us to make it happen." He outlined the details of SpaceX's Mars colonization plans, everything from the transportation infrastructure to the settlement's life support systems. Musk's passion for the project was palpable, and the audience responded with rapt attention. "But this mission isn't just about rockets and spaceships," Musk continued. "It's about something much bigger. It's about ensuring the survival of humanity. It's about creating a future where we are not bound by the limitations of one planet, one environment. It's about ensuring that humanity's story doesn't end here." The room erupted in applause. Musk had done it again. He had captured the imaginations of those around him, inspiring them to believe in something greater than themselves. He wasn't just selling a vision, he was selling a future that they could all be a part of. Back at SpaceX headquarters, things were moving at full speed. Teams worked tirelessly on the design and testing of the Starship, the spacecraft that would be the cornerstone of the Mars missions. Every test flight, every breakthrough, brought them closer to making history. But there were still plenty of challenges ahead. And with the clock ticking, the pressure to succeed was mounting. Musk, however, remained as committed as ever. He knew the risks, he knew the odds were long, but he also knew that without risk, there could be no reward. SpaceX was positioned to change the world, and he was ready to lead the charge. As the months passed, the Mars mission gained momentum. Test flights for the Starship were successful, and the first missions were being planned. Musk's vision was slowly becoming a reality, and SpaceX was on the brink of transforming space exploration forever. But as the world watched, something unexpected happened. A new challenge emerged, one that threatened to derail everything Musk had worked for. A rival tech billionaire, someone who had long admired Musk's work but had a different approach, publicly challenged SpaceX's timeline and methods. He claimed that Musk's aggressive approach was reckless and would put lives at risk. For the first time in years, Musk found himself facing a direct challenge from someone who wasn't afraid to confront him publicly. The stakes had never been higher. The tech world had always been a place of intense competition, but the latest controversy caught everyone off guard. A rival billionaire, Victor Hawk, who had made his fortune in AI and quantum computing, launched a public campaign criticizing Musk's aggressive timeline for Mars colonization. Hawk was no stranger to the spotlight, but his direct challenge to Musk was unprecedented. Standing at a podium during a high-profile tech conference, Hawk boldly declared, "Musk's ambition to colonize Mars is a dream, but it's one that could lead to disaster if pursued too recklessly. The technology just isn't there yet, and rushing forward with this vision could cost lives, not to mention billions of dollars in waste." Hawk's words cut through the air, and the media pounced. The headlines the following morning were dominated by his claims. Victor Hawk calls out Musk, Mars colonization could be a death wish. The debate erupted in the public sphere, with supporters of both billionaires passionately defending their respective visions. Elon Musk watched the media frenzy unfold with a sense of quiet resolve. He had expected opposition, but Hawk's attack was more personal than he anticipated. Musk had always been a risk-taker, but now he found himself defending not just his vision but the very essence of his approach to innovation. The next day, Musk scheduled an impromptu press conference. The room was packed with journalists eager to hear his response to Hawk's accusations. Elon stepped up to the podium, his usual calm demeanor in place, but his eyes reflected a hint of determination. "Victor Hawk is a brilliant man. I don't question his intellect, but I do question his understanding of what's at stake here. Mars isn't just a dream, it's our future. The Earth's resources are finite, and if we don't act now, we risk everything. The people who say it can't be done are often the ones who haven't tried." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. "Space exploration is about taking risks. It's about pushing boundaries and expanding our horizons. If we wait for everything to be perfect, we'll never leave Earth. We'll never make progress." The journalists in the room were spellbound, and Musk's confidence and clarity shone through. "I've said it before, and I'll say it again, humanity's survival depends on becoming a multiplanetary species. I'm not in this to play it safe. I'm in this to change the course of history." The press conference didn't end the debate, but it did make it clear that Musk wasn't going to back down. In the days that followed, his team at SpaceX continued to make progress on the Mars mission, and the media began to focus on the technological advancements that were occurring behind the scenes. Test flights for Starship were proceeding successfully, and the public began to rally behind Musk's vision once more. However, Hawk's challenge wasn't without merit. Critics of Musk's approach argued that his timeline was too ambitious, that the safety protocols for the Mars mission were still in the early stages, and that the environmental risks were too great. As the months passed, the rivalry between the two billionaires became a topic of heated discussion among experts, tech enthusiasts, and the general public. One evening, as Musk reviewed data on the latest Starship test flight, he received a call from Sandra Lee, his COO at Tesla and SpaceX. "Elon, we need to talk." Sandra's voice was tense, a rare occurrence. "Victor Hawk has been making moves. He's launching a new initiative focused on lunar development, and he's already starting to gather support from some of the investors we've worked with." Musk frowned. "Lunar development?" "He's playing the long game, using the moon as a stepping stone to Mars. He's trying to shift the conversation." "Yes, exactly," Sandra replied. "He's painting it as a more logical approach, safer, more feasible. He's even partnered with a few aerospace companies that have a strong track record in lunar exploration." Musk leaned back in his chair, contemplating the challenge. Hawk's initiative could divert attention and funding from SpaceX's Mars mission. If the lunar project gained momentum, it could delay or even derail Musk's grand plan. "We can't let him steal the narrative," Musk said, his voice firm. "We need to double down on our efforts. Let's accelerate our testing and ensure we're the first to establish a sustainable presence on Mars. The moon may be the first step, but Mars is the destination. Sandra nodded. I'll start making arrangements with the team. We'll push for faster development on the key technologies we need. Musk's mind raced. Hawke was a formidable opponent, but Musk had one thing on his side, his unrelenting drive. The two men may have different methods, but Musk had always believed that the future was built by those who took bold steps, by those who were willing to take risks others wouldn't. A few weeks later, SpaceX launched its most successful Starship test yet. The spacecraft soared to new heights, reaching an altitude that had previously seemed impossible. The successful flight was a game-changer for Musk's Mars plans, and it couldn't have come at a better time. The media coverage surrounding the flight was overwhelming, and Musk used the opportunity to reaffirm his commitment to the Mars mission. The path to Mars won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But we're closer than ever. And we will get there. The question is not whether we can do it, but whether we'll let the fear of failure hold us back. I refuse to let that happen. Despite the media's renewed support after the successful flight, Musk knew that the battle was far from over. Victor Hawke was still out there, positioning himself as the more cautious, methodical alternative. The public's opinion remained divided, and investors were increasingly wary of the risks involved. Every step forward in SpaceX's journey to Mars was met with increasing scrutiny. As the rivalry escalated, Musk felt the weight of the challenge. But he had faced adversity before, and he wasn't about to let a rival tech billionaire stand in the way of humanity's future. For Elon Musk, there was no going back. The mission was clear, and he would fight for it, on every front, in every way. The question now wasn't whether he could overcome this new obstacle, but whether the world would follow him into the unknown. The rivalry between Elon Musk and Victor Hawke was no longer just a tech debate, it had become a full-fledged battle for the future. The media, investors, and tech enthusiasts were all closely watching as the two billionaires' differing visions for humanity's future in space played out. Victor Hawke's lunar development project was gaining traction. The concept of building a sustainable infrastructure on the moon, a stepping stone to Mars, appealed to those who were cautious about Musk's ambitious timeline for Mars colonization. There was no denying that Hawke's approach was more measured, less risky, and perhaps more palatable to the investors who were nervous about Musk's relentless push for the Red Planet. In contrast, Musk remained unwavering. He doubled down on his vision of Mars colonization, arguing that waiting was not an option. He was driven by a belief that humanity's survival depended on reaching beyond Earth, whether the public or the investors understood it yet or not. As SpaceX's Mars mission advanced, the pressure mounted. Musk was no stranger to pressure, but this felt different. The stakes were higher. The future of human space exploration itself hung in the balance, and it wasn't just the success or failure of SpaceX at risk. It was the legacy of those who dared to dream bigger than anyone thought possible. Elon sat in the quiet of his office late one night, reviewing data on the latest Starship test. The spacecraft had made its highest successful flight yet, but Musk couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were higher than ever. A sense of urgency gnawed at him. The clock was ticking, and every day that passed felt like an opportunity slipping through his fingers. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from Sandra Lee. "Elon, we need to talk," Sandra said, her tone more serious than usual. "We've received a significant challenge from Victor Hawke's team. They filed a lawsuit against us, claiming that we're putting the Mars mission at risk by failing to prioritize lunar exploration first. They're pushing for a halt on funding for Mars colonization until we focus on the moon." Musk's jaw tightened. He had known that the rivalry would escalate, but this was a direct hit at the heart of his vision. "They're using the legal system now," Musk muttered, pacing across the room. "This is more than just business. This is an attack on everything we're building." "I'm afraid so. They've garnered support from several major investors, and if this lawsuit goes through, it could slow down the Mars mission considerably." Elon paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The weight of the situation was immense, but Musk's resolve was unshaken. He had fought battles before, public, legal, and personal. This was just another challenge, and he wasn't going to back down now. "We're not stopping," Musk said, his voice firm. "Let them try to delay us. We'll push forward. This is bigger than any lawsuit. We'll prove that Mars is the future, not just the moon." Sandra was silent for a moment. "I'm with you, Elon. But we need a plan. Hawk is playing dirty, and the pressure is going to get worse." Musk's mind was already racing, formulating a response. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal hurdle, it was a battle for the public narrative. Hawk was playing his hand carefully, leveraging public sentiment to try to force Musk into a corner. But Elon Musk wasn't the type to be cornered. "I'll handle the media," Musk said. "We'll launch an awareness campaign that shows why Mars must come first. If they want to challenge us in the courts, fine. But we're going to take this conversation straight to the people." The next morning, Musk took to Twitter. It had become his preferred platform for communicating directly with his followers and the public, bypassing traditional media channels. "Humanity's future is on Mars. The moon is a stepping stone, but we can't afford to waste time. Our survival depends on taking bold steps. We will not be delayed by legal challenges or slow progress. SpaceX's Mars mission is on track, and we are going to make it happen. #Mars or bust." Within hours, his tweet went viral. It was clear that Musk's supporters were rallying behind him. But there was also a significant portion of the public that sided with Hawk's more cautious approach. As the media latched onto the story, a polarized debate erupted. The lawsuit continued to loom over SpaceX, and the legal battles intensified. In the courts, both sides presented their arguments, each staking a claim to the future of humanity's space endeavors. Hawk's legal team argued that Musk's timeline was overly optimistic, and that it was reckless to risk so much capital and human life without a more measured, gradual approach. On the other hand, SpaceX's legal team, led by a veteran of corporate litigation, fought fiercely to keep the mission on track. The argument was simple: SpaceX had the technological expertise, the resources, and the resolve to make Mars a reality. Delaying the project would only ensure that someone else would take the lead. And that, Musk insisted, wasn't an option. But the legal battle wasn't just a fight over timelines or money, it was a fight for the future of space exploration. Musk and Hawk had become symbols of two competing philosophies. Musk's vision was unrelenting and audacious, while Hawk's was cautious and pragmatic. And the world was watching closely to see who would prevail. Amidst the pressure, Musk made a bold move. He announced a press conference that would air live from SpaceX's headquarters. It was a risky gamble, but Musk knew it was time to take control of the narrative. The legal battle was dragging on, and the public was starting to doubt whether SpaceX would be able to achieve its goal. This press conference would be his chance to remind everyone why he was so committed to Mars, and why he was the one who would get humanity there first. When the day arrived, Musk stood in front of the cameras, calm and composed. "I know that many of you are wondering whether we can succeed," he began, looking directly into the cameras. "I know that there are those who think we're moving too fast, that we're taking unnecessary risks. But let me be clear, humanity's future is not something we can wait for. We can't keep playing it safe and expecting progress. Mars is our next step." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. This mission is about more than just rockets and spaceships. It's about ensuring that we, as a species, survive. The Earth's resources are finite, and we need to ensure that we don't put all our eggs in one basket. The risk of failure is great, but the risk of doing nothing is far greater. And I, for one, will not let that happen. The room was silent. The cameras flashed. Musk had delivered his message, loud and clear. The press conference set the stage for the final showdown. The lawsuit was still ongoing, but the tide had begun to shift. Public sentiment seemed to favor Musk's bold vision. People were drawn to his confidence and his unwavering belief in the importance of the Mars mission. Hawke's more cautious approach started to lose some of its momentum. But the battle wasn't over yet. There were still legal hurdles to clear, and Hawke wasn't about to back down without a fight. The future of humanity in space was still uncertain. But one thing was clear, Musk wasn't going to stop. The mission to Mars was far from over, and Musk would continue to push forward, no matter what. As the rivalry between Musk and Hawke escalated, the legal battle raged on. But amid the chaos, something unexpected began to unfold. Musk, known for his relentless pursuit of progress, realized that in order to keep the Mars mission on track, he might need to reassess his approach. If there was one thing that Musk knew, it was that progress was never linear. It required adaptation, flexibility, and sometimes, partnerships with those you least expected. But now, Musk was starting to wonder if there might be room for a middle ground. After all, if humanity's future was at stake, wasn't it worth exploring every possible avenue? It was during a late-night brainstorming session at SpaceX headquarters that the idea first took root. Musk was hunched over a table filled with charts, designs, and proposals when Sandra Lee entered the room. She had a grim expression on her face, but there was something in her eyes, a hint of resolve. "Elon, we need to talk," Sandra said, sitting down across from him. Musk looked up, taking a deep breath. "I know. The lawsuit. Hawke's trying to stop us. But I'm not backing down." Sandra nodded. "I know you're not. But there's something else we need to discuss. I've been talking to some of our investors, some of the same ones who are backing Hawke's lunar project. There's a potential opportunity here." Musk raised an eyebrow. "What kind of opportunity?" Sandra leaned in. "We could form an alliance. We don't have to go it alone. If we can find common ground with Hawke, if we can show that the Moon and Mars are not mutually exclusive, we might be able to convince the investors to back both projects. We can continue pushing for Mars, but we also work on the lunar mission with Hawke." Elon sat back in his chair, thinking deeply. The idea was radical, but it had a certain appeal. It would allow SpaceX to keep its focus on Mars, while Hawke's team could take on the lunar development. The two companies could share resources, expertise, and even funding. It was the kind of partnership that could solve many of the challenges both sides faced. "Interesting," Musk said slowly. "But do you really think Hawke would go for it? The man's been trying to tear us down for months." Sandra smiled wryly. "He might surprise you. After all, he's got just as much to lose as we do. His vision depends on getting to the Moon, but he can't do it without the kind of rocket technology we're developing. Maybe he'll realize that working together is the smartest move." Musk rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It was a long shot, but if there was a way to unite their efforts, it could change the course of space exploration. The key would be convincing Hawke that collaboration, rather than competition, was the future. The next day, Musk reached out to Victor Hawke. The invitation was simple: let's talk. Together, we could make history. Hawke, ever the strategist, didn't dismiss the idea outright. The two men had exchanged barbs in the media for months, but behind the public personas, they shared a mutual respect for each other's achievements. Musk's boldness complemented Hawke's meticulous planning, and Hawke knew that the innovative spirit of SpaceX was essential for his lunar development project. A meeting was scheduled for the following week. It would take place in a neutral location, an undisclosed conference room in a tech hub in Silicon Valley, far from the glare of the media. The day of the meeting arrived. Musk and Hawke, both well aware of the significance of the conversation, walked into the room with a guarded respect. They were there not just to defend their own vision, but to discuss the possibility of joining forces. As the meeting began, it was clear that neither side was eager to concede. "You know I'm not interested in slowing down," Musk said, his tone direct. But I'm willing to consider that the moon might be a part of the equation. If it means moving faster toward Mars, we could work together. Hawk leaned forward, his sharp eyes calculating. I never said you were slowing down. What I've always questioned is your timeline. You're pushing for Mars too quickly, and you're not factoring in the risks. But I admit, you've made progress that I never thought possible. Maybe there's a way to combine our strengths. The moon could be the first step, with Mars as the ultimate goal. Musk raised an eyebrow. So you're willing to work with us, not just against us? Hawk paused for a moment, then nodded. I've always believed that humanity's future lies in space. Perhaps it's time to stop fighting over the path and start thinking about how to make both missions work. The moon can provide the necessary infrastructure for the Mars mission, resources, technology, and data that we could both use. Musk smiled, his mind already racing with possibilities. The two of them could create something far greater than they could achieve alone. They could build the foundation for humanity's survival beyond Earth, not in competition, but in cooperation. All right, Musk said, extending his hand. Let's do this. Let's build a future, together. Hawk shook his hand firmly. Agreed. Let's make history. The announcement of the new alliance took the world by storm. The headlines read, Musk and Hawk join forces, a new era for space exploration. The partnership was hailed as groundbreaking, with both billionaires agreeing to share technology, resources, and data to further their shared goal of making humanity a multiplanetary species. The collaboration didn't come without its challenges, of course. Both companies had to make adjustments to their strategies, and there were still many skeptics who doubted the success of such a partnership. But for Musk and Hawk, the benefits were clear. Together, they could accelerate the development of space technologies, create a sustainable lunar presence, and use that infrastructure to pave the way for Mars colonization. As the world watched the new partnership unfold, the rivalry that had defined Musk and Hawk for so long seemed to fade into the background. They were no longer competitors, they were collaborators with a shared purpose. For the first time in months, Musk allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. The path to Mars was still difficult, and the challenges were far from over. But now, with a powerful ally by his side, he felt like the impossible was just within reach. With the partnership between Elon Musk and Victor Hawk officially announced, the world was watching. The media, the public, and investors were all on edge, wondering whether this historic alliance would truly mark the beginning of a new era in space exploration, or if it was simply a temporary alliance between two rivals with conflicting visions. In the midst of the excitement, however, there was a growing undercurrent of tension. While Musk and Hawk were publicly aligned, behind the scenes, the pressure of merging their two worlds was beginning to reveal cracks. For one thing, the logistical challenges of working together were monumental. SpaceX and Hawk Industries operated on different timelines, different approaches, and different cultures. While Musk's vision for Mars was driven by urgency, Hawk's focus on the moon relied on careful, methodical planning. Both men were used to being in charge, and though they were capable of compromise, their egos were constantly at odds. But it wasn't just internal friction that threatened to undermine their collaboration. There were forces at play beyond their control, forces that had been watching from the shadows all along. Late one night, Musk sat alone in his office, staring at the latest reports from the SpaceX R&D team. Despite the collaboration with Hawk, there were still plenty of hurdles to overcome. The pressure was mounting, not just from the media, but from investors, political leaders, and even the general public. Many were still skeptical about the viability of Mars colonization, and even more were unsure about the risks associated with lunar development. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sandra Lee, "We need to talk. There's something you need to see." Musk's heart sank. Sandra wasn't one to send urgent messages unless something serious was at hand. He called her immediately. "What's going on?" Musk asked, his voice tense. "It's Hawk," Sandra said, her tone low and cautious. "We've been getting reports that his team has been secretly meeting with some of the largest private investors. The same ones who were backing him before the alliance. And the thing is, they're not just talking about the moon. They're talking about a new plan, one that doesn't involve us." Musk's blood ran cold. "What are you saying? They're planning to cut us out?" Sandra hesitated, then continued. "I think so. They're discussing a separate venture, one that would bypass SpaceX and go directly to the government. They're framing it as a safer alternative to Mars. If they get the backing, it could ruin everything." Elon leaned back in his chair, a surge of frustration coursing through him. He had known that Hawk was a strategic thinker, but he hadn't expected him to play this kind of game, especially not after they had agreed to work together. "Where's Hawk in all this?" Musk asked, his voice tight. "I don't know yet," Sandra replied. "But we need to act fast. If this is true, we can't afford to let it slip under the radar." Musk thought for a moment, his mind racing. This wasn't just about the legal battle anymore. It was about control, about which vision would dominate the future of space exploration. If Hawk was scheming behind his back, it could unravel everything. "We're going to confront him," Musk said, his decision firm. "Get everyone in the room. We'll settle this once and for all." The next day, the showdown took place. Musk, Sandra, and the leadership team from SpaceX met in a secluded conference room, waiting for Hawk to arrive. When he walked in, he was all business, his expression unreadable. "Elon," Hawk said, nodding as he took a seat. "Sandra. It's good to see you both." Musk didn't waste any time. "Victor, we've got a problem. We've been hearing rumors about meetings with investors and a new plan that could cut us out of the equation. What's going on?" Hawk remained calm, his hands folded on the table. "I'm not sure what rumors you've heard, but I assure you, I've been fully committed to our partnership. I don't know where these things are coming from." "Cut the crap, Victor," Musk snapped. "We know what's happening. And if you think you can double-cross me, you've got another thing coming." Hawk's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his composure. "Elon, let me be clear. I'm not trying to cut you out. But my priority has always been to build something sustainable. The moon is the first step, and there are forces, governmental, political, and private, that don't share your urgency about Mars. I'm simply exploring every option to ensure we succeed, and that includes talking to the right people." Musk stood up, walking around the table. "And if that means you go behind my back to get what you want? What does that say about your commitment to this partnership? We agreed to do this together." Hawk stood as well, matching Musk's intensity. "I'm committed to the mission, Elon. But sometimes, we have to be pragmatic. We have to look at the bigger picture. If we can secure additional funding or support for the moon mission, then it benefits everyone, yes, even Mars." For a moment, the room was silent. The tension between them was palpable. Musk was seething, but he knew that if they couldn't find a way to work together, their shared dream of space exploration would crumble. Finally, Musk exhaled. "We're not going to get anywhere like this. So let's figure out a way to move forward. If you want to pursue additional funding for the moon, then fine, but it has to be transparent. No more secrets, no more backdoor deals." Hawk regarded him coolly, then nodded. "Fair enough. But let's make one thing clear, I'm not going to sit idly by and watch Mars become a pipe dream. We both need to make sure our missions succeed. And I'll do whatever it takes." Musk looked at him, his face hardening. "We're in this together now, Victor. I won't let you forget that." After the meeting, both men were left with a lingering sense of doubt. It was clear that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The collaboration was fragile, held together by the shared goal of space exploration, but the cracks were showing. The pressure of external forces, hidden agendas, and the weight of their respective legacies was beginning to take its toll. As Musk stared out the window of SpaceX headquarters, the weight of the future pressed down on him. He had fought for this moment, the opportunity to push humanity into the stars. But now, more than ever, he realized that the biggest obstacles wouldn't come from rockets or technology. They would come from those who didn't believe in the mission, and those who were willing to undermine it for their own gain. In the end, Musk knew that it was up to him to hold everything together. The dream of Mars, the future of humanity, and the legacy of SpaceX, it was all on his shoulders. And he wasn't about to let it fall apart. The days following the heated confrontation between Elon Musk and Victor Hawk were tense. Both men, still wary of each other's intentions, went about their work as though nothing had changed, but beneath the surface, the stakes had been raised. The delicate alliance between SpaceX and Hawk Industries hung in the balance, threatened not only by external forces but by the unresolved tension between the two visionaries. Musk, never one to back down from a challenge, threw himself into the mission. SpaceX's preparations for Mars continued at full speed, but he knew that the lunar project, which he had once dismissed, was now a crucial part of the larger picture. If he wanted to secure the future of Mars, he had to play his cards carefully with Hawk. Every decision mattered. Meanwhile, Hawk had his own plans, quietly putting his own network of investors to work, securing additional funding for the lunar mission. The moon, as he saw it, was the first step in humanity's spacefaring journey, and he was determined to make it a reality, no matter the cost. Musk's Mars mission might be bold, but in his mind, the moon had more immediate, tangible benefits. Still, there was a part of him, however begrudging, that admired Musk's drive. The man was relentless, and in some ways, that was what the space industry needed. But Hawk couldn't afford to let go of his own vision. As long as Musk and SpaceX were part of the equation, he had to make sure he came out on top. It was late one evening when Sandra Lee contacted Musk again. She was agitated, a rare sight for someone as composed as her. "Elon, we need to move fast," she said over the phone. "I've just received intel from our contacts within Hawk's camp, there's something big going on, and it's not good." "What do you mean?" Musk's pulse quickened. He had a bad feeling about this. They've been talking to the government, directly. Hawk's been lobbying for a partnership with NASA, bypassing SpaceX altogether. They've been framing it as a safer, more sustainable path for lunar development, one that would give NASA more control. Musk leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. If Hawk managed to secure a deal with NASA, it would be a game-changer. Not only would SpaceX be left out, but Musk's entire vision for private space travel would be in jeopardy. He couldn't allow that to happen. "I've got to meet with him," Musk said firmly. "This ends now." The meeting was arranged quickly, held in the same conference room where they had shared their first heated exchange. This time, the atmosphere was colder, more tense. Musk walked in, his mind focused, ready to confront Hawk once again. Victor Hawk was already there, sitting at the head of the table, his steely gaze fixed on Musk. There was no warmth in his eyes, only calculation. "Elon," Hawk said coolly, nodding in acknowledgement. "I assume you're here about the recent discussions." Musk didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've been talking to NASA, Victor. You're trying to shut us out." Hawk didn't flinch. "I'm doing what's necessary. The moon is a global project, not just one company's dream. If you think the government won't get involved, you're mistaken. I'm trying to secure a future for humanity, and NASA is a key player in that." "You're playing with fire," Musk said, his voice low but fierce. "If you go through with this, you'll destroy any chance we have of reaching Mars. You're trying to control the narrative, but you don't own the future, Victor. We do." Hawk leaned forward, his voice hardening. "Don't kid yourself, Elon. You've been riding on the coattails of public excitement, but without the government's backing, your vision for Mars is just that, a vision. I'm securing the funding, the partnerships. You're just one part of the equation." Musk's expression darkened. He stood, his fists clenched. You think you can outmaneuver me? You're wrong. I've built SpaceX into a powerhouse, and if I have to go through the government to prove that private space travel is the future, I will. There was a long silence, the two men locked in a battle of wills. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of their words pressing down. Finally, Musk broke the silence. I'll make you a deal, Victor. You want to involve NASA? Fine. But it's not going to be on your terms. We go in together, or not at all. We share the mission, we share the funding. The future of space exploration is too important to be controlled by any one man. Hawk's eyes narrowed. He was a man of principle, but he was also a realist. Musk was right about one thing: private space travel was here to stay. The world had changed, and the future was no longer in the hands of governments alone. You're a stubborn man, Elon, Hawk said after a long pause. But maybe that's exactly what we need. Musk's expression softened slightly, but there was still determination in his eyes. I'm not asking you to be on my side. I'm asking you to be on humanity's side. Hawk studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Fine. Let's put our differences aside, for now. If we can make this work, then maybe the future will be brighter than either of us imagined. The next day, the two men announced their final agreement. Musk and Hawk would combine their efforts, working together with NASA to create an integrated approach to lunar exploration. The partnership was groundbreaking, not only for its boldness but also for its unity. For the first time, the vision for the Moon and Mars didn't have to be mutually exclusive. The cooperation between private companies and government agencies would ensure a sustainable future for humanity beyond Earth. But while the world celebrated the announcement, Musk and Hawk knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. There would still be politics to navigate, funding to secure, and risks to overcome. But at least, for now, they were on the same side. And that was the first step toward the stars. The future of space exploration had been forever changed. Musk's dream of reaching Mars, Hawk's vision of lunar colonization, and NASA's involvement in the mix had set the stage for the greatest adventure humanity had ever known. Together, they had created something more than just a collaboration, they had forged an alliance that would propel humanity into the stars. But Musk knew, as he gazed out over the horizon, that the real work was just beginning. They had the resources, the technology, and the resolve to reach new worlds. But the true test of their alliance would be how they handled the trials and tribulations of the journey ahead. And as for Musk, he knew one thing for sure: nothing would stop him from making humanity a multiplanetary species, not even Victor Hawk. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?